We belong because stories and narratives remind us that we belong. Stories ground us in the retelling of love and of purpose and of struggle and of journey. Stories ground our belonging in space, in place, and in time. Stories remind us that we were there. And because we were there, here makes better sense. The biblical story opens with the idea of belonging, with the declaration, in the beginning, God. That declaration established both our origin and then further affirmed our identity and our belonging with the continued statement, okay, now let's make them in our image so we know we belong. Black History Month is about the telling of stories and narratives that remind the world that as people of African descent, living in forced diaspora, whether that be through transatlantic slavery, through colonialism or neo-colonialism, that we belong, that we are here, that we belong to stories and histories that predate the Eurocentric telling of our story, that we too have a place in the historical human fabric, a place that Western culture and civilization benefits from, but fails to feature us in. Black History Month is about highlighting the fact that we have been written out of our own story and replaced with narratives that say, you're here, but you don't belong. Black History Month is about reminding us that if one member of the human family cannot truly belong to the whole human story, then as a human family, we are just simple bits and pieces of a human narrative. And if that is the case, then how can any of us truly belong? You see, belonging only happens when we accept that we all have a right, a necessary and undeniable right to belong. That until all belong, then all cease to be seen. And until all cease to be understood, then how can only a few paint the picture or create the fabric that tells the truth about everyone? Until the truth of all is told, only the lie of the rest of us remains. Black History Month begins with who we were as people of African descent before Europe interrupted our story and changed our narrative. That's where Black History Month actually begins. Black History Month is not just about who we've had to be post-slavery. It begins with the African contribution to the Western understanding of medicine and of math and of philosophy and of science. We begin there, and we must always begin there so that present Black generations understand that we belong. It begins for me as a person of faith and as a believer in Jesus Christ with the retelling of the biblical story in its Afro-Asiatic cradle, and not through Eurocentric lens, not through narrowed Eurocentric lens that minimizes to the point of obscuring the place of Africa from the ancient biblical text and narrative. We begin there so that present generations of Black people and Black children understand that we belong. It begins with us understanding that while we may try to bend the biblical story to support recent lies and to support recent ideas about who we are as human beings, if you dig long enough in the earth, just go and dig long enough in the earth, the biblical story is always going to tell its own historical truth. The kingdom of God will always call us to tell that truth. Ultimately, our kingdom reality begins and ends, belongs to a beginning and ending that begins and ends with Jesus Christ. As a human family, We belong to him through creation, but because of the introduction of the phenomenon of sin and the rupturing of the relationship between the divine and the human, that blew that out, that blew that whole connection out. And so he reintroduces a new paradigm into the human story, a paradigm now that binds us to him through creation and then binds him back to us through incarnation. The phenomenon of sin may separate, but look at him. Look at him. He comes into the human bloodline and family tree to come from us, born like us, looking like us, black like us, living like us, dying like us. He is us. He chooses us. And when I say us, I'm not just talking this us, I'm talking human us. He is us. He freely chooses to be us. He freely chooses to love us at all cost to himself so that we will know that we belong. He makes it clear. Listen, you didn't choose me, you know. I chose you. To belong to him and to belong to that kingdom reality is to belong to the reality that Jesus is still with us. And in doing that, we must die to anything that says that we do not belong to each other. We have to die and reject completely the ideas and the constructs and the traditions that devalue our humanity, and relegate us into that place of believing that we do not belong together as human beings. Because knowing that we belong will always lead us to actions that reflect that belonging. Black History Month is a call to that belonging. Black History Month is a call to the remembering of that belonging. It is a call to correcting limited and false narratives, not just 1 month out of 12, but 365 days out of 12 months. The disciple Matthew wanted everybody to know that Jesus belonged to the Hebrew family tree. So in the telling of Jesus's genealogy, he begins with Abraham, the father of the Hebrew people, and works his way up the family tree and ends with Jesus. When you go to the Gospel of Luke, Luke isn't speaking to a Hebrew world. Luke is speaking to the Roman world. He is speaking to the world outside of the commonwealth of Israel. And he wants them to understand just how far back human belonging to this man, Jesus Christ, and the God that he represents and the kingdom that he brings, how far that goes. So instead of beginning at Abraham and working up, he begins at Jesus and works back and goes back and goes back until he gets to Abraham. Then he keeps on going back and back and back until we read the words, was the son of Seth, was the son of Adam, was the son of God. We belong because narratives and stories tell us we belong. Black History Month. Black History Month is the Black reminder to the world and our affirmation to each other as descendants of Africa in forced diaspora. It is our affirmation to each other to tell the stories and share the narratives that not only remind us that we belong, but that affirm the fact that we belong.